Good morning, Richard.
Hey, good morning, Keith Jones.
Good. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How are you? You looks like you just got done with a workout.
Yeah, I had a little virtual spin class this morning, man. A few of us got together and we just kind of loved on each other, man. Got a little physical exercise in. So you know how the community rolls.
I love that. And you know what's great about it too, Keith, is even though we're in this pandemic, that you have maintained contact with our group, and people are still associating. And even though it's virtual, it's still an important part of their lives.
Yeah, thanks, Rick, man. Consistent with what we believe, I just accepted the pandemic really early, and I just kind of pivoted and just said, hey, listen, these are, the lemons. Let's make some lemonade. And so we've been making lemonade for over a year now, man. I'm grateful for that. So I thought we'd kick off a little podcast here. And let me just, this podcast is how can I best show that I care about the world? How
Oh,
can I best show that I care about the world? So
well,
why don't
I
you
was
kick
going
it
to
off?
say, I was going to throw it back to you. Uh, okay, well, let's talk about it. I think we're probably pretty similar on what our outlooks are. I think the first step would be not being a problem.
Hey, you know me, man. My track record has been notorious for being a troublemaker in every space that I walk into with my complaining and my judging and whatnot. And when I laid down being a troublemaker, that changed a lot. So go ahead.
No, I think you're exactly right. We don't realize it. We think that when we complain, we're being reasonable. We're only exercising our personal rights. And if we don't, then someone's going to run over us and take advantage of us, and our life will be messed up and we'll be less than human. And so we have all of these reasons why we can be a pain in the neck to other people. But the first step is self-monitoring and deciding what it is that you're doing that is a block or an obstacle between you and happiness. And that usually has to do with you complaining and judging and basically being a pain in the neck. How about for you?
Dude, the same thing, man. I look at, every space that I come into now, I see it as an opportunity to contribute and to make a difference in that space. And I want to leave a light footprint, man. I just want to leave a little kindness in the air, a little gratitude, a little grace. Every space I come into, that's my, intention is to contribute that to the space. And for decades, if you listen to any of our podcasts that have kind of recounted the decades before I began to practice, that's not what I did, man. I brought my complaining to every situation, my judging, my expectations, the way things should be, upset when they're not that way. I was just like you said, I was a problem. I was a troublemaker. And, Eckhart Tolle said something about complaining. He said, you know why complaining is addictive? He said it's addictive because you get to be right all the time, all the time.
That's right.
And
That's
that's strengthens
exactly
the
right.
ego loves being right. And so that strengthens it. And so I've been okay, man, with not being right. It was a struggle for the ego. I mean, the ego set me down and talked to me like, hey, listen, this whole thing you got about we're going to go on a different path. He's like, you didn't consult me on that. You didn't ask me, was I down with that? I was like, because I knew what your answer was going to be. So
That's right.
I just want to uh, contribute to the world in a different way, and I find that that can be my best. And that doesn't mean that there are not some causes and things like that that I care deeply about, like diversity and inclusion and those things, because I do. But I've learned to not be against things and rather to be for them. And by being for them, I become more inclusive. I invite more partnership from people that may think differently than I do to the cause. And so I just know that being kind, being thoughtful, being loving, all those things, accepting, those things are a way for me to best serve the world, instead of being a problem.
I agree completely with that, Keith. One of the things we don't miss, but we should, as I said earlier, I think the first step is not becoming an obstacle to others, which means not becoming an obstacle to yourself. We can still have a cause to fight injustice or to eradicate things like non-diversity or intemperate behavior, things that we can control. We can always do what we think is appropriate in the world, and that includes, protesting and all of the rest. But what I'm talking about is something else. I'm talking about something like creating the kind of environment in your head that is toxic. And we do that with judging. I notice myself that when I start when I have a thought about somebody else not doing what I think is appropriate, or just not being cool, or whatever my ego says about that person that makes me feel more superior, whatever that is, every time I have that thought, I feel a little bit of a pain. I've noticed when I started on this journey, it's really, it sours you in a little way. Every little judgment sours you. And yet you go down this thing, you go down this path, and lower and lower, souring and souring and souring every time you make those judgments. So at the end of the day, all you have is a list of hot buttons of things that make you mad and irritated. And as you said, that gives you the opportunity to be completely right. It gives you the opportunity to be unchallenged and the king in your world, but you actually become an obstacle to yourself, which prevents you from being effective in your personal affairs. And so I think that when we can eliminate judgment and we can focus on the things that, like you say, kindness and grace and an opportunity to help others, those are the things that are enriching and make us feel great about ourselves. Now, there's also one other component to this, and that is that toxic environment that judgment creates, for example, can happen without your cooperation. You can be with another person or a series of people who are nothing but toxic. And you have to remember, just like when we look at our own behavior, that when those people are being toxic and judgmental and vicious, gossipy, that takes a toll on you as well. And you have a choice. You can walk away, or you can be pleasant and, not invest any more love or interest in those folks. Or you can join the club and be just like them, which I think that in the end is a detriment to your well-being and your personal effectiveness as a human being. Last point on that, and that is that no matter how much we strive to be kind and to be gracious, there's always going to be someone who's going to give you the finger, or there's going to be a circumstance that's going to slap you in the face. The key is the expectation. People screw up on this. They think, okay, I'm going to try being Keith for a day. I'm going to be kind and gracious. But as soon as they get someone who's stern and doesn't appreciate it, and there's no thank you coming back, well, then all bets are off and you go back to being your old self and judging. The practice is all about being the way you want to be, regardless of how everybody else is. If everybody else is a jerk and gossiping and mean and vicious, okay, that's their path. That's not yours. But I think if you take the idea that you're going to be who you want to be, and you're going to be this kind, gracious person with a mission to help others, then there's an inner glow, there's an inner peace that comes to you that you can feed on, and it'll take care of you, it'll feed you. Your ego is going to still come up. It's still going to be saying, no, that's a great point. Why was that person mean to me? What the heck's going on here? But the practice is all about pushing that down and understanding that the ego is there to make you right, and not to make you a loving, compassionate human being.
Yeah, Rick, I 100% agree, man. As you were talking, man, I'm just letting your wisdom just kind of wash over me. And you're right, there are going to be those situations in which your practice is going to be strong, and you're going to think that you have it, and you got to nail down, and you got to be aware that false sense of I got it is going to pop up, and then you're going to be challenged by another person or another or a life situation. And just when you think you got it, that's when it will happen. So just be mindful that becomes your practice too. And so don't beat yourself up. But you're going to be met with people that are unconscious in both thought and behavior. And when and something like this happened just last night, we were talking about something that it was really about a humanitarian issue. And so I don't know how you can see it differently. Violence against another human being. I don't know how you can see it differently. But this person did. So, I mean, it was amazing how quickly my conscious, loving self was flowing through the door, and then the ego, I don't know where it came from, but it stood up and closed the door. And then all I heard was concepts and thoughts, and my friend became an enemy, and I just made them something that they weren't. And we got in a great conversation, and I heard myself say, how can you even how can you? And then I was like, oh, shoulders got raised, eyebrows got raised, the brow thickened, voice elevated. And then I was like, oh, there are no external enemies. There's no problems here. It's just a thought that someone shared. That's it. And then I came back down. I said, hey, you know what? We're having a good time just connecting right now. How about let's not talk about this? Because my troublemaker was like, hold on, I got this. And they stood up and they were like, no, no, you sit down. You sit down. We got to handle this. And I was like, no, man, we're not handling anything because this is just going to ruin the moment, the vibe, and us debating this. There is no positive outcome to that. And so I've learned to be with people that think differently than me. And again, I can only be responsible for my path and what I contribute to the world.
That's
And I
right.
think that I can be a vehicle or a vessel for change, positive change that's about diversity and inclusion and unconditional love. I can be all those things and still, and still make a contribution that's positive. So again, I'm for things, not against things. And by saying that, I don't create enemies of other people. And it's so easy to do. But I think a lot of what we experience in the world in terms of strife and violence, whether it's whether it's verbal or whether it's actual physical violence, is because people take a concept, they identify so deeply with it that they create other people as enemies, and they start othering and becomes us versus them and all that nonsense. And I'm just not about that, man. I'm truly about how can I bring my best self to the world? How can I make the best contribution to the world? And the word that I can do it is coming from this place of peacefulness. So, man, the words that you dropped down, Rick, were just beautiful. And the practice doesn't start until you're challenged. That's when the practice
That's
starts.
right. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. It's like trying to get back in shape. Let's say that you let yourself go during the pandemic and you ate things that you probably shouldn't have, a lot of sugary stuff. And so you're a little bit overweight. Well, trying to get back into it is really, really tough. And the only way you can do it is just by being cognizant of what your habits are. And if your habit is to constantly judge or to ratchet up an argument because you need to be right,
Right, yeah.
yeah, that's the kind of thing that's going to be toxic, just like eating more ice cream would be toxic when you're trying to get back into shape. So, I guess I'm talking about a couple of things. We started off by saying how people can avoid being obstacles. And
Yeah. How people can best show they care about the world.
yeah, and so not being a problem to other people is what we were focusing on. But I'm in order to do that, you first have to have your own house in order, right? You first have to have some kind of an approach that's not ego-based, wanting to be right about all your concerns and all your valuable opinions. There's a Zen proverb that says something along the lines of, it's easier to ride the horse in the direction he's going. In other words, going with the flow, not being troubled by what other people think, is important because it shows that you're on your own path. It doesn't mean that you don't still want to fight for things that you believe in. It just means that you have to recognize that when you're in this practice, when you're on your path, you're going to be challenged all the time. And you have to be mindful of the fact that it's easier to go in the direction of kindness and gentleness and wherever you're going, rather than to get into the fight with the other person. One of the things that's happening, I think, I'm hoping is happening, is I'm seeing it little by little in law. People are a little more civil. We went through such such an emotional conflict with the last election. I think people are tired of it, many of them. A lot of people aren't. A lot of people thrive on it and want more. But I think the general feeling that I've had is that people want to be more civil. And you start with the proposition that we have more in common than we do that are differences. I mean, we want the best for our kids, right? We want to have a better life. We want to live a healthy life. We want to enjoy, be happy. I think those are common human values. And so the only issue, not only, but the issues really devolve to how do you best accomplish that? And that's where the disagreement comes in and the name calling and all of the rest. But if we start with the proposition that we have a lot more in common as living beings, it's a lot easier to stick with the practice and to maintain that sense of being part of a whole where you can be kind and gentle and not feel like you're giving up any right or any respect or self-respect for yourself.
Right, exactly. I agree, Rick. And just to kind of close the show out. Please add if you want to add something more to what I'm about to say. And that is, you began the conversation, and rightfully so, about what the personal responsibility could be, and that is to not be a problem, not be a troublemaker. That could be your first contribution. So before you even start to like, I'm going to go and feed the homeless, or I'm going to go and start this initiative at my workplace. Before you do any of that, like, just start at home first and just say, I'm not going to be a problem in the workplace, or with my family dynamics, or to myself.
That's right.
And one practical thing that I did early on was I began to self-monitor and become aware of how often I complained. Rick, let's say there were 10 thoughts in my head at one time, 9.9 of them were complaints. I mean, like, it was crazy how much I was complaining. And so just self-monitoring how often you complain is going to be a game changer, that you become aware with how identified you are with your thoughts. Because the moment that you complain, you latch on that, it becomes part of your identity. You get to be right, and you start just living your life that way without even knowing it. And I think that another thing is to have friends like you guys, you and Pete and Brian and Tim in my life, that lets me know when I'm complaining, and it's not very often, but you guys just kind of go silent. You practice noble silence. And then I hear myself talking out loud. I'm like, wow, am I the only one here who's negative? Yeah, you are. And so that just really helps. But I think if people would just monitor first how much they complain about life, the situation, the traffic, the work schedule, why am I not, working with this person? Why did they move this person here? Stuff like this. I mean, is my life so put together that I have the capacity to worry about what somebody else is getting and what I'm not getting, and scarcity and fear? And no, my life is not that together that I have time to be worried about other people and how unfair life or people are to me. So I've just really made it a point to monitor complaining and to start to reduce the number of complaints that I have. And I still catch myself every once in a while. And it's like you said, I have this feeling that I'm not settled, I'm not peaceful, I'm not kind. And that's my signal that that I am not being the best, I'm not making the best contribution I can that signifies that I care about the world. What about you?
And one little footnote to that, Keith, and that is that, that helps the world, that you appear better to it. You present in a way that is that's not a problem. That's an important part of it. But the real value for the person is you cut out the suffering, because that judgment,
yes,
and that complaining, that creates an inner cycle of suffering. You see a stimulus you don't like. There's some kind of stimulus that you don't like. Let's say it's somebody else getting a promotion, and that you judge it. You make it, he didn't deserve it, I do. I didn't get the credit because that person did. And you go down that road. That creates inner suffering. And that's what we're trying to avoid. I would hope you'd want to be able to have a peaceful, calm life full of gentleness and compassion for others. So you start with the idea of monitoring what you're complaining about, and then let it go. Let it go. If you can change it, change it. If you can't, okay, you're in.
Exactly, man. And what I found is three of the best contributions that I can make are being kind, accepting others and life, how it shows up, and also giving people grace. Those are some contributions that I can make in terms of showing that I care about the world.
You're a great human being, buddy. I'm so proud to have you as my friend. That's a beautiful thought.
That's how I feel too, Rick, man. I love you, man. Thank you for today's show.
I love you, Keith. Adios. See you next time.